One of the biggest stories of 2014 is still making headlines early this year. In New York, thousands of police officers are still outraged with their mayor, Bill de Blasio, for siding with police protesters. Now, the largest police union in the nation is demanding special protection under the federal hate crime laws. This story doesn't seem to have a start date. We were seeing much of the same issue in Los Angeles nearly 25 years ago when white police officers beat Rodney King, and they got off without any criminal prosecution. Back then, federal prosecutors issued indictments against King's attackers, and King actually survived the beating. But today, Michael Brown and Eric Garner are dead, and their killers haven't even been indicted. There's so much to discuss on this topic, especially in regards to police and the justice system. For instance, the Supreme Court just ruled 8-1 in favor of the police stripping citizens of protection of officers if they simply plead ignorance. Oh, wow. Well, for more information on this, we turn to author and attorney John Whitehead. John, it's a pleasure to have you join us again.
Hey, thank you, sir.
John, it's obvious there is something wrong with our justice system. What's not so clear is how to fix it. Neither judges or police officers like the idea of their work being recorded on video. There seems to be a serious fear of transparency. Who shoulders more of the blame in your mind, police officers or the court system?
Well, it's the courts. The courts are there to protect us. The courts are there to enforce the Constitution. The courts are there to make sure that any government agent does not oppress us, unreasonably violate the law. But the courts are not doing that right now, especially the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court we have right now, I would say, is a very statist court, the Roberts Court. We filed a number of cases up there, and we're always basically disappointed. There seems to be a mindset, and I will say this overall in Washington, D.C., with the Washington, D.C. establishment, that includes Congress, the White House, and the courts, that there's something to be feared from the average American citizen. You see it in the militarization of the police. You see it in the Department of Homeland Security purchasing over 1 million hollow point bullets for their agents, and all the things we're seeing from all the devices handed out to police agencies, from Stingray devices where they drive through our neighborhoods and download what's on our cell phone or our laptops. There just seems to be a fear out there. It's not terrorists, by the way, that they're targeting. They're targeting you and I, innocent citizens.
So why are they afraid? Why are they afraid of the average American?
I think there's a paranoia. I think they're seeing an unrest. It's programs like us. It's the work that we do at the Rutherford Institute. It's the people out there protesting. The government, to be honest with you, never has liked protests. That's why we have a First Amendment. The people who wrote our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, saw it right away. James Madison, he said we ought to mistrust all those in power. That's an exact quote. That's why you have a Bill of Rights. That's why you have a First Amendment that says you have a right to speak out. That's why you have a Fourth Amendment, which says that the police can't do surveillance on you. They can't touch you. They can't invade your home or your car without what they call probable cause in the Fourth Amendment. That's actual evidence of a crime before they do the surveillance or touch you or invade your home. But as I've chronicled in my writings and in my book, A Government of Wolves, the police do it all the time, and invade our rights, and the Supreme Court is upholding it almost unanimously. Yeah,
I want to get to that in a second, but so many of these high-profile cases have been discussed ad nauseum. We've reported them so often here, and by now most people who care to know already see the results, but there are hundreds, even thousands of more cases that go unnoticed. Just this week we reported about an officer in Texas seen on video pulling an old man over for what he thought was an expired license, tackled him, and electrocuted him with a taser. As it turns out, the license was actually valid. The officer was wrong all along. And since then, that officer has been fired, but he doesn't face any criminal charges. Should a badge be an excuse for ignorance?
Of course not. It doesn't apply to the American citizen. I mean, if you go to into a court of law, and I'm a lawyer, like I say, I've defended people. If you go in there and say, well, I didn't really know what the law was, the judge is going to look at it and say, it's your duty to know what the law is. It doesn't work for the average citizen. But with the recent cases we're seeing, if a police officer pulls you over, like in this Highland case, that the Supreme Court ruled that if the policeman pulls you over and he doesn't know that he's violating the law when he pulls you over and goes ahead and does a search, well, he can do it anyway. It's a reasonable mistake. But we can't do that. It doesn't work both ways. Like I say, the establishment that we're dealing with in Washington, D.C., the so-called federal government, and now the extensions out into the states and local communities with the police, they don't really respect our rights anymore, in my opinion. I see it in the cases you're citing, the cases that we handle here, the things that I'm seeing across the country. I'd say you go back 30 years ago, people would be shocked. They wouldn't be able to handle this. They wouldn't know what's happening. But we've become very accustomed to it now, and we're accepting it.
Now let's talk about that recent Supreme Court ruling. We know the regular citizens, guys like you and me, cannot legally plead ignorance in a court of law. You just mentioned that that defense doesn't hold any water unless now you have a badge. In that case, police officers, they get special privilege and protection from the same laws they're paid to uphold. Don't you think that creates more cause for concern in the public eye?
It should cause a lot of concern. And the other thing is, police officers have what's called qualified immunity. I mean, you have the case in Atlanta with the child where they threw a flashbang grenade, a SWAT team, and burned half the body off of a kid's face. The policeman got qualified immunity there. In cases that we've handled where they've done SWAT team raids and people have gotten shot, the courts rule they have qualified immunity. They're not held liable. And when they are held liable, and that's only in a few instances, by the way, very, very small amount of cases, guess who pays the damages when damages are paid out? It's you and I, the taxpayer. So what I'm saying, and I talk to a lot of older policemen who are really concerned about this. They're seeing the training in the academies. They don't like it. It's very militaristic. And now, if you have the courts giving the nod saying, okay, you have qualified immunity, you don't have to know the law exactly. You can make a reasonable mistake, and you can go ahead and search someone's car or house. We're in a heck of a mess, folks. I mean, you have to understand that, and this goes back quite a ways. A couple of years ago, the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Kentucky versus King, an 8-1 decision, that if a SWAT team arrives at your door, if they're at the wrong house, they don't have a warrant, but they think you might be doing something illegal, they can still go through the door. Justice Ginsburg said that's the end of the Fourth Amendment. That's the state of affairs in the country. And I'll go back and say it, the president and the Congress are not protecting us from that.
Now, many civil rights activists have pointed out once a person engages in conversation with a police officer, they're essentially opening themselves up to all kinds of judgment and potential harassment, or maybe even worse. Perfect example, there's a viral video we just reported on. Some gentlemen in Florida decided to go through a DUI checkpoint. They hung their driver's license and a flyer asserting their right to silence and their right to an attorney. They hung it outside the window in a Ziploc bag, went through the checkpoint, and the police simply said, okay, you're free to go. They never opened the window. They never spoke a word. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that should the average law-abiding citizen be afraid of the police?
It depends on where you're at. And again, I advise people, if you're out late at night, you're by yourself, be nervous. If you're in a car during the day and you have friends, I would say record your conversations. Have people use their cell phones to record the conversation. You have a right to do that. And I would assert your rights, but here's the key, and I find this universal. Most Americans don't know their rights. First of all, learn your Fourth Amendment really, really clearly, and your First Amendment. But the Fourth Amendment is the anti-police state provision we have in our Constitution. And the average American has no idea that the police have to have some legal evidence before they can search your car or your house. People go ahead and grant it all the time. Once you open the door to the police, you don't have much of a defense. But if you stand your ground, search your rights, and here's the key: if we want to remain a free country, if we want to remain a free people, we're going to have to assert our rights. We can't just back down and go, okay, I'm afraid, because if you're afraid and you've done nothing wrong, especially, you're giving up a whole panoply of rights, and you're affecting. We're mutually tied together in this country. So when you assert your rights, you're protecting somebody else's rights. So I'd say stand up. If you get badgered or whatever, contact a group like the Rutherford Institute or whatever, and we'll see what we can do.
Now, John, in the Supreme Court of Illinois, they had overturned the wiretapping statute, and there was a great celebration from activists and people all over the state. But then, in a strange twist, the legislators of the state of Illinois actually passed a law in the House and the Senate that would basically make it illegal for anybody to record a police stop, a third party standing outside and recording a police stop. So, for example, you get pulled over, you can record your own police encounter, but somebody who might see it from a distance cannot pull up their camera phone and start recording. Well, in fact, they can, but they actually have to hold the recording for about 24 hours and notify the police department that they have the recording before it's released. As far as we know, it's still sitting on the governor's desk. It hasn't officially become law. But what do you believe that law, even after the Illinois Supreme Court overturned it, what is that law indicative of in the state of Illinois and the nation at large?
Well, it's indicative of one thing. The police unions are very, very powerful. I've seen a number of cases. In fact, I would say that many of your legislatures, whatever, the police unions have such an important and massive impact that that's what you're up against. But obviously, you know what my viewpoint on that would be is that it violates the First Amendment. That's a case that's going to hopefully wind its way up in the courts. But as far as what the Supreme Court would do with something like that, I don't really know. But again, the only way you can find out is challenge it.
Now, going back to the police unions and the power they have, you know, I think it's safe to say that we've moved on from concern and worry into areas of rage and even hatred in the public. In places like Ferguson and New York, we've seen some very angry reaction to these police killings. Now, police are looking to protect themselves. In fact, as I mentioned in the introduction of the interview, just recently, the largest police union in the country demanded that President Obama add the police uniform to a list of protected parties under the hate crime law. 300,000 armed police officers collectively told the White House, "We want special protection." Do police officers feel threatened when they go to work in the morning? And if so, does that pose a greater problem for them when they try to do their job? Should they be protected under hate crime laws?
No, I think that you have a right to criticize the police under the First Amendment. I mean, again, I know a lot of good policemen who don't even agree with that position either. But the point is that policemen being shot in the line of duty is at a 50-year low. Crime in America generally is at a 40-year low. We've seen a recent rash of things. I hope that the protests continue because that's important. We have to get the ears of our politicians. But most policemen I know don't feel fearful. I think the police unions will use that as a propaganda tool, obviously, to get their way. But the fact that you can't criticize a policeman or whatever under a hate crime law is egregious to the First Amendment. They're a public official. They're on the public payroll, and the First Amendment does apply to them. It's state action under the law. So, again, if we really want to see these things change, I'd say people keep the faith, keep out there, keep protesting, and show that we're really concerned and we want our freedoms to be maintained. All right, John. Once again, thanks for joining us on WHDT. Thank you, sir. That was John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute. You can find out more about him at rutherford.org. Up next, we've got today's special reports, and we've got your Daily Digital standing by.